You're listening to episode number 25 of the Indie Film Tribe podcast with me, your host, Angela Matamocha. Welcome. Hi there, good people. Hi. Angela Matamocha of Indie Film Tribe here with you today. Thank you so much for joining me. Today, believe it or not, is a milestone episode. This is episode number 25. And I've got to say, when I started this podcast, I thought, okay, if I could get to episode number 25 and still be excited and passionate and stoked about what I'm doing, well, then I'm going to keep on keeping on. And the truth is, this has just been such an incredible experience for me starting this podcast. And I hope that you guys are enjoying it as much as I have been enjoying creating these episodes. Okay, so when I first started this podcast, my goal and my mission, as you guys all know, is to support, shine a light on artists that are committed to creating socially conscious content. And I'm going to rewind real quick and read a little bit about my bio so I can sort of segue into what we are doing today. So here is what I wrote, and this is still true. I believe stories that shine a light on issues such as police brutality, racism, homophobia, mental illness, homelessness, religion discrimination, addiction, equal rights for women, incarceration, child abuse, elderly abuse, can help educate, inspire change, and elevate our consciousness. This is my belief, and this is why I am so passionate about helping artists create socially conscious content. One of the first things that I did before starting the podcast, I had a brainstorm with my mastermind group. So what I said in my mastermind, I said, gosh, I really want to interview people that can help artists create these kind of stories. But I also wonder, is there a way I can bring on guests that actually have real life experience in these kind of topics that I want to talk about? So initially, I couldn't find my way. I just thought, you know what? Let me just start with what I know, and that is the film community. That is directors. That is screenwriters. That is all of these kind of people, right? But there is this nagging thing at the back of my mind, like, gosh, I still want to bring into the mix someone that's actually either experienced one of these sort of elements, talks about them, is in our community doing work to elevate our consciousness, not just by way of storytelling through film, but in ways of doing, community programs, of speaking, of different avenues like this. Okay, so I know I'm rambling a bit, but I just really want to set this up for you really well. So now, having said that, and this being our 25th episode, guys, welcome to episode number 25. And again, this being a milestone for me, and this podcast, since we're only 25 episodes in, is still a bit of an experiment. So today, episode number 25, I am actually able to bring on someone that completely embodies and encapsulates one of my main missions for this podcast. Today's guest is a gifted speaker. He is also a fellow podcaster and a two-time author. And from October of 1992 through August of 2002 was incarcerated inside the Federal Bureau of Prisons for the crime of armed robbery. For a decade of his life, he lost his friends, his family, and most of all, he lost himself because of a horrible and irresponsible decision that he had made. His inmate number was 22855-086, and he was only one of many angry and uncertain souls lost in the tombs of the federal prison system. He wrote his first book while in prison. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to introduce you to Lawrence A. Haskins.
Hi,
Welcome.
hi, Angela. How are you?
I am so grateful that you are here with me today. How are you?
Oh my God, that was an amazing build-up. Now I'm shaking in my boots.
It's all you. It's all you. And you know what? I just want to jump right into this if you don't mind. Let's just get
Absolutely.
right to it. Having just said what I said, what is it, Lawrence? What is it that drives you to do what you do? And I'm speaking about Lawrence Speaks. You're a speaker. Tell us about
Yeah.
that.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me, Angela. I really appreciate this opportunity. Um, I think what drives me is what drives most people, whether they've experienced what I've experienced or not. And that's the desire to connect on a really meaningful level. And all of us do that by way of our experiences. You know, our desire to connect is determined by what we've experienced. So, specifically for me, as you mentioned, my prison experience is something that it stays with me. I have been out 15 years. I was convicted 25 years ago, but I still think of that time every day. And so I look at the world through the frame of the inmate who's sitting on his bunk, just really hungry for change. Someone who feels like I know the world just is looking at me like I'm lower than dirt. But if I could just get one more shot at the title, I know I would go out there and kill it, right? And so what drives me is reaching those individuals to let them know that their heart and their soul is being heard and that they can make it from that circumstance.
I have to ask, because just the little bit I do know about you, I sense that you're a very empathic person. You really take in the energy around you and the people around you. I feel that you take that in. Am I correct in assuming this?
Yes, I've been told that. Yes.
Yeah, I can tell. I wonder, being in an environment like that, I can only imagine the level of a lower vibration or just very negative energy. How can you be in an environment like that and in your mind know and want a second chance and know when you get out you're going to kill it? Where does that come from?
It's a evolutionary process, right? You're in a perpetual state of conflict, of emotional conflict when you're in a place like that because you know you screwed up, but you're in a place where you can't really show contrition. And after time, it actually literally turns you into a savage. You are expected to come out as normal in abnormal circumstances. So in my case, for a decade, I saw inmates get murdered. I saw correctional officers get murdered. And you know, in these places, you know, they're not shooting sniper rifles. It's very crude weaponry that they have. So these things are they're very brutal, the things that you see. And over time you become desensitized to it. Right. And there's times where you can laugh when you see someone get brutalized, because it's just kind of the norm. So over time, you know, you kind of reach this point where you've imploded so much and your personal infrastructure has collapsed so much that you don't have any choice but to look at the rubble and try to shift through it and try to make some sense of it. Now, the interesting part of it is once you piece that back together, you're never the same. Like no one goes to prison and comes out exactly the way they were when they went in. You either come out worse or you come out better. But even the better has its scars. So I think where it comes from is that somewhere in that far echo of a tunnel, the person that you used to be, it calls to you and not everybody listens. It calls to you and you just kind of have to make that decision to crawl out of that quagmire and say, that is who I want to be. And then, of course, you know, letters from loved ones like your mom, and every now and again when you get a visit, it kind of makes you feel human. But it just comes from a place. It just comes from a place of personal decision. But it's never there. Like it's how can I say this? It's never there in the terms of it's always on the forefront of your mind, because what's on your forefront of your mind is survival.
Right.
Who's the next guy with the blade? If I look at this cat wrong, is it going to be a violent situation? Or, I mean, if we think race relations is really bad out here in the real world, go to a prison and watch a race riot. It's the worst. It's the worst of humanity. So, all that, to your question, it's just a matter of evolution. Over time, you get desensitized these things, and then at some point, a good part of you kind of floats to the top, and you got to just decide if you want to take hold of it or not. So I hope that answers.
Yeah, it's just wow, that's really powerful. And one of the things that you said here, you just spoke on choice.
Mm.
So I wonder, you know, growing up the way you did, being in this situation, do you do you believe that you are a product of your environment? Are you a product of your choices? Is it a little bit of both?
Hmm. Yeah, I think you can't have one without the other, because I do believe our environment influences our choices. And so, for example, if you have a kid that grows up in the Hamptons, right, in northeastern United States, and they're surrounded by privilege, well, their influences are going to be largely different than the kid that grows up in Watts, surrounded by the crack epidemic or whatever, and what have you. And sometimes those choices diverge, because sometimes that kid from the Hamptons wants to walk on the wild side. And
Right.
then sometimes that kid from Watts is like, you know what, I'm not doing this. I'm going to go to college and I'm going to become a stockbroker or a doctor, right? So sometimes those choices diverge. But when you think about those choices, those environments still perpetuated those choices, because the kid in the Hamptons is like, you know what, I'm sick of this goody two shoe stuff. I want to try something different. The kid in Watts is, I'm sick of this hood life. I want something better for me and my succeeding generations. So for me personally,
Yes.
I grew up in a deeply religious home, right? Two-parent home. There was nine of us. Our parents raised nine of us. I mean, if you
Wow.
come, yeah, you come around my way, man. There's a lot of us, right? And now there's kids and nieces and grandkids, and so
Uh,
there's a lot of Haskins running around, right? Um, and but I think that religious upbringing, there was so much guilt, right? And there was so much anxiety on my parents' part to be accepted by the church, because to them that was their source, right?
yes.
And there was this really old school, fire and brimstone. If one of us made a mistake, it was not a matter of, hey, let's see what's going on. How does this reflect on us as the church sees it? Was more or less, right? Now, I say all that. I have a really great relationship with my parents now.
Yes.
Um, However, it did, at the time when you're a kid, it did inspire a lot of anger. So there was corporal punishment, blah, blah, blah. And I would say um, the emotional heavy, and I kind of hesitate to say abuse, but the emotional heavy was a lot more than the corporal punishment.
Wow.
Uh, and so for me, what affected me was my confidence. Like, no one really guesses about me. My confidence was completely shattered. Confidence, right? And we can come back to that, how that played into my choices. But when you don't have confidence, you want to be accepted,
Right.
right? You do a lot of things to overcompensate for what you don't have. And so I think, for me, it's just there was a lot of emotional conflict, and it began my incarceration.
Hmm.
No one is incarcerated when the authorities put the cuffs on them. The incarceration happened before,
Aha.
and it continues after. So I would say,
Elaborate on that, if you will. The incarceration happens before the cuffs are on you. So what do you mean by that? In your mind, in your spirit?
both. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So, because what happens is for me, so again, the
Yes.
confidence, right? Being berated by my dad at the time. And he was, he grew up in rural South. He was
Yep.
doing the best he could. And
Yep.
we have that
Absolutely.
understanding now. But being berated by him and not, he was very emotionally distant, right? When we were growing up. He's a big teddy bear now, um, but so back then it made me question myself. If my father doesn't want to really engage with me, like, am I really worth anyone wanting to engage with me? And that's where the shackles started. And so it goes from this where you're questioning yourself to anger. You see other kids with really great relationships with their dads or whatever. Then all of a sudden you become this angry kid.
Right.
And so that's what I mean. Like, you just get entangled in your mind, and then it sets you on this trajectory, even though you know right from wrong, right? It sets you on this crash course trajectory to where you do things that when it happens, it just doesn't make sense to a lot of people.
How old were you when you committed this crime, if you don't mind me asking?
Absolutely not. I was 22.
Wow. 22. Gosh. It's so interesting because I think back, one of the things that you touched upon earlier was the fact of, okay, let's say there's this kid in the Hamptons,
Hmm.
his environment is very different. And we talked about, the difference about making a choice versus your environment.
Sure.
I myself, in high school, I lived very close to Delamo Mall, right?
Hmm.
I used to shoplift as a child, okay?
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying, armed robbery and shoplifting is the same.
Sure.
However, it's not
It's,
right. Neither one of them is right.
that's right.
Neither one of them is right.
That's right. They're both criminal.
They're both criminal.
Yeah.
So, I remember the last time I got caught. I think I was like 16, 17. I think it was at the Broadway. I'd stolen a skirt. I'd put it underneath my shirt. I thought I was so slick. So they took me to the back of the store, and I was with a friend. The friend left. She didn't know that I was stealing. But one of the things that stayed with me, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up, and maybe it'll make sense, is the fact that they kept me in the back of the store for a long, 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 long time. I didn't know
Mm,
if I was going to jail. I didn't
right.
know what was going to happen, and I was petrified.
Right.
Long story short, my father finally came, so mad, so mad. And he told me, I let you stay back there on purpose. I wanted you to be scared. I wanted you to think that you could go to jail. And he said, next time, I will not be picking you up. That's the last time I stole.
Yeah.
Now, I imagine, what if I was of a darker skin tone? What if I was a male?
Mm,
Would I have been put in the back of the store for a couple of hours? Would they even bother to call my parents, or would I have been taken straight to juvie?
right. Yeah.
These kind of things I always wonder, because I know as kids, whether you're, early 20s, teenagers, we make stupid mistakes. We just do. Obviously, it's a level of degrees, but I
Yeah.
can't help to think, like, God, I could have been in jail. I could have been taken. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
rightfully so. I stole. I'm not supposed to steal.
Right. Right.
I guess the reason I bring this up is just because I think there are differences, and definitely you can speak to this, on how differently we are treated in our youth, depending on our gender, depending
Mhm.
on our race, and depending on our economic status.
Yeah. 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 That's a very interesting point, because so I think it should be noted that that robbery that I did in 1992, that was the only felony I ever committed.
Damn.
It was it wasn't like there was this history uh, of like me doing this for a little bit and then this and then this. No, 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 no. That was the first time I had ever been in trouble. So this is where the sentencing laws come in.
Yes.
I remember my judge. His name was Judge Robert J. Bryan, Washington State District Court, Federal District Court. And I remember when it came time for me to get sentenced, he said to me, he said, this is a sad day because his son had went to high school with my oldest brother.
Oh, wow.
And he goes, I know your family. He goes, but my hands are tied. The way these sentencing laws are written up, we are just here now to administer the sentences. So I have to give you this 10 years and 10 months. I have to. And
what does that mean, 10 years and 10 months?
So I ended up doing a total of 10 years and 1 month. So because you get like 54 days good time off a year. But I lost a lot of my good time because I got in a lot of trouble while I was locked up. That's the Bible thing that we were talking about.
Yes, yes.
And so the funny but not so funny, kind of morosely funny thing, I remember when he said, because they give you the sentence out in months, and he goes, okay, Arlen Lawrence Haskins, we're sentencing you to 130 months. And I was like, 130 months? That's not bad.
Oh, my gosh.
I did the math. I was like, what? Wait. 120 months is 10 years. So you just pretty much gave me 11 years. Great. But to your point, I had never been in trouble before. And, I definitely tell people all the time that, I don't think that I should have, armed robbery is serious.
Right.
And I definitely don't think that I should have gotten off with anything, with no punishment whatsoever. But 10 years, almost 11 years for your first, go round, it's pretty harsh. I had just gotten out the military. I went in the military when I was 19, and I had served my term in the military. I was over in Korea, and it was pretty devastating. It was a pretty devastating time for me. But I think that, I remember when I was in the county jail running into individuals, Caucasian individuals who had did things similar, or was either on their fourth or fifth, and they were getting 4 years because their charges hadn't gone federal. Whoever the powers that be chose to keep their charges state.
Wow.
In the state level, they have a lot more leeway with what they can do with individual sentences. Yeah, and so it was like, what are you in here for? Yeah, armed robbery, it's my third one, but I'm going to be going to the States, so I'm looking at, 2 years to 4 years. They're telling me at a minimum, I'm going to do a decade. Minimum. And if I don't act right, I might could do 15 or 20 years. Like, it was crazy. So, yeah.
How did you feel when you heard these stories of these other inmates doing similar to what you did or worse and having to spend less time? How did that make you feel, not only like in your mind, but like in your heart? And how do you survive day to day knowing just the injustice of it all? How do you even cope with that?
Yeah, it's tough because here's what the powers that be don't understand is that it sets up a really dangerous framework for the inmate, for the minority inmate, because you're already kind of like mad because you have to go do all this time. You're mad at yourself. You're mad at whatever caused you to do it, right? And it takes a long time to accept the fact that you just made the choice and you got to do the time, right? However, when you hear stories like that and you're looking at a blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid, and it's not the blonde-haired, blue-eyed kid's fault, right? He's not the guy you got beef with because he's just a product of a system like you are.
Exactly.
It just happens to be skewed in his favor and skewed against our favor, right? So you hear that, and then that's when the indignation sets in. So when you get to the prison that you're going to, or you're even in the county jail, now all of a sudden you start hating authority. You have this beef because you see them as the arm of the individuals that's letting this white kid get 2 years and you're going to do 10. Or in the case of drug offenses, you get a white kid caught with 2 kilos of powder and get 6 months, and an African American get caught with an ounce of crack, and I'm talking, and this is no, I'm not inflated. I'm talking about 30 years. In the early 90s, they were giving out 30-year sentences for almost negligible amounts of crack cocaine, like it was candy. But the white kid could have 2 kilos of powder cocaine, 6 months. So it really fuels this anger,
Yeah.
where you're already angry, but now you have this really weird sense of indignation and you hate the system.
Right.
So now it halts your personal development because now you're projecting your anger on something that it's funny because it's a justifiable anger, but it's kind of like out of priority because really what you should be focusing on is getting yourself better.
Yes.
But in the current of all that anger and hostility and violence, everybody projects it on the police, especially minorities. So it kind of halts you. And that's what the people, the higher ups, they don't understand is that, hey, you're distracting me from my time to get better. Because now you give me something else to be angry about and push my sense of personal responsibility to the back burner.
It's almost like it's a distraction.
Yeah.
And this again speaks to what we started this conversation off with, you being an empath and taking in all this anger, all this energy, and somehow being able to rise above this, Lawrence, which just blows my mind, and know that when you get out, you are going to kill it. You're going to make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, let me ask you this. I want to
Yes.
veer on. Okay, so you're in this situation, all this energy, all this negativity, all this anger, and somehow you write a book.
Yeah.
How in the world does this happen? Tell us
Yeah.
that story.
Yeah. So I've always had an inclination to write. So the first thing I think of any importance that I ever wrote, I was like, I don't know, 8 years old. And one of my older brothers was in college and he really liked this girl. And he had me write her a letter. I was 8. I mean, maybe 9 at the most, right? And I wrote this letter and he got the girl. And it was, so I've always had this really great appreciation, abiding appreciation for words and putting them together in syntax and everything like that. So fast forward, so I want to say 7 years. I was 7 years into my sentence. And what happened is I got into a violent altercation, a really bad one. I was sent to the hole.
What's the whole?
Special housing units where they basically put you in a box. You don't, maybe you might get to go outside for an hour a day, but you're basically housed away from what they call general population.
And are you alone or do you have a mate, a cellmate?
You're alone.
Whoa.
Yeah, you're alone. So I was doing I believe it was a 60-day term, one of my smaller terms in the hole. And you just sit there and you have a lot of time reflection. So but the night that I was put in, right, your emotions are ramped up and you're angry at the guy that you got into the conflict with, and you're still in this whole, this braggadocio and blah 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 blah. And I remember I went in, and when I finally settled down, I fell asleep and I had this dream. And I didn't know what it was, but what it turned out to be was the ending of my first book. And so when I woke up the next day, I kicked on the door, I banged on the door, I asked them for some paper, something to write with. And when you're in the hole, because you might be suicidal, they don't give you like a pen, you get a nub of a pencil, it's about this big, wow, right? And they give you like a little sheet of paper. And I just started writing. First thing I started writing was what my dream was. I just started writing and writing. So 60 days later, I come out the hole, I go back to general population, and I have about probably 3 tablets full, right? I didn't even have the name of the book at that time, but I was just writing the story. And so now I'm in general population, the doors open up at 5 in the morning. You get locked down somewhere between 7, 6 at night. And I never wanted to be that creatively immersed while the doors were unlocked. So I always did my writing when the cell doors were closed at night. And so at night, that was my sanctuary. It's perfectly quiet. The only thing you hear is the guards' keys clanking around, and then they come in every now and again and shine a light in your room, and they count you like your cattle. But I wrote the very first draft of it all longhand. I wrote the whole book long, and but what was interesting was, and this is where I have to say that it wasn't like I almost had to say it wasn't a conscious decision on my part, because when I started writing it, if this makes sense, when I started writing it, there was no way I could stop writing it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes.
I started it and there was no way. So it was like throughout my whole days, I would go out there. You go out there, you walk, they got this little track and you do your pull-ups and your push-ups and you do all that kind of stuff. And in my head, my whole time was filled with these characters and these stories, and I couldn't wait for the cell doors to close at night so I could write. And so really it was like, it was out of my hands at that point.
What is the name of this book?
It's called The Whisper of Serpents. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's a fiction book. And it's largely, but there's a lot of the anger and angst that I felt as a kid is embodied in one of the main characters.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. That's just
Yeah.
I want to veer next to Lawrence Speaks.
Yes.
Lawrence Speaks. When you first told me about this, literally just the little hairs on my arms stood up, and I was just like, wow. Talk about being a beneficial presence on this planet. This is how I see you, and this is how I see the work that you are about to do with Lawrence Speaks. Please tell us about this.
Yeah. So Lawrence Speaks is my organizational platform to go in and speak to incarcerated individuals, basically all over the United States and hopefully across the world. And it's something that I guess in a mercenary kind of way, I've been going to these places, doing this a long time, but I just felt that it was time to organize it, put a face to it. And I think one thing I want to express about it is that there was a lot of fear in me doing this, because fast forward my life, I do the 10 years in prison, but I ended up working for Apple. I was a leader in a position of leadership at Apple.
Amazing.
I was a certified systems trainer for Xerox Corporation, and none of the people, and I built some really deep relationships in both those places in the corporate world, period. But no one knew that I had went through that in my life. And I was also always very careful. So I have these social media accounts and friends from these different places.
Can I pause you for 1 second?
Yeah.
Because this popped up in my mind, and I'm sure others are thinking this too.
Sure.
When you got out and you go to apply for jobs, isn't there a place on your job application that specifically asks this question? How did you handle this?
Yes. So I got lucky, right? I got very lucky. So now, by the time I started working for Apple and Xerox and those, it was probably 9 years after I got out. However, there's a lot of states that once you have a felony, they're going to ask you, have you ever been convicted of a felony? In the state of Washington, where I live, the question is, have you been convicted of a felony in the last 7 years? So I got fortunate, and every time that question came up, I would say no, because by that time my conviction was almost 20 years old. And they asked, have you been convicted in the last 7 years? No, right? And so I was able, and they Apple does really strenuous background checks, but I believe that in my state, they can only go back 7 years.
Wow.
And so, you go through the interviews, they don't They don't even suspect this about me. They're just looking at my resume. I get hired. And so leading up to this, the Lawrence Speaks mission, it was something that was just really like, hey man, you have this experience and you are really being selfish if you don't start reaching out to people and like telling your story, because the only way this is going to have real credibility in terms of gathering partnerships and doing these things is if people know why you're involved in it. Now, do the kids in the juvenile know why I'm doing it? Yeah, because I share that with them when I go speak with them.
Right.
But I never let it out. And so there was a lot of fear with it. And I remember once I told my story, I did it on an Instagram post.
Social media, boy, get your message out there.
I put it out there, and the response was amazing. Like, individuals were just like, Lawrence, man, are you kidding me? And a lot of them, they would say, okay, now we get the intensity. Now we get why you worked so hard and why you were always on. And I said, look, man, you never forget what it's like to not have anything. You never forget what it's like to not have freedom. So whatever opportunity you get, you try to knock it out the park because you don't want to lose it. And so, once I let it out, I reached out to certain people that I knew and that I used to work with. They agreed to come on. People that have never been in trouble. They never had so much as a wink from a police officer, right? But they were like, man, yes, we want to get on board and we want to help. And so I would, aside from the Lawrence Speaks thing, I would just tell anybody who's listening that, if you have something that you may see as shameful, right? But that there's people that are going through it. And if you've come through it, I'm not going to judge anybody and say you have an obligation, but I would just say really consider putting your story out there, because like I've told you on the phone, Angela, like Lawrence, as an organization, Lawrence Speaks is probably 2 weeks old. And the people that have come alongside it in 2 weeks, like Angela here, like it's amazing what happens when you walk in your true self. And our true self is the good parts and the bad parts. It's the sum of everything. And so, but yeah, Lawrence Speaks, I'm excited about it. I feel the most alive when I'm interacting about it or when I'm doing something on its behalf. And it's all about these kids, it's all about reaching them. And I know that in the tombs of those prisons that there's more individuals like me. And the system's not going to give them a chance. Period. The system is designed to work against them. Not only just like, hey, do your thing. No, we're going to actually try to put stumbling blocks in your path. When you get out, we're going to give you a jerk of a probation officer. I believe I told you, Angela, that before I got out, my so-called counselor told me I was never going to be anything. Flat out told me that. And he was there for our health and well-being.
Wow. So being there for your health and well-being, telling you that you're never going to be anything.
It's never going to be anything. So Lawrence Speaks exists to combat all that stuff. Yeah.
Wow. That's okay. All right. This is just so powerful in what you're doing, and I'm sure our listeners can, resonate and feel what you're saying and what you're talking about, because you are walking in your truth. And I have to ask, you said you had these relationships at Apple and these other companies that you worked at, and they never knew your story. Yeah. Do you now feel just a sense of relief and a sense of kind of peace?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. And I mean, I think once you can just be who you are, no matter where you are, right? No matter what you're doing. And even for the people who may look upon it negatively, once you let it out, you really don't even see the negativity, because there's so much positivity coming at you. Like the negativity is like a gnat to an elephant. Like you don't even, and it just buoys you to like, man, you know what? And then the only thing you feel sad about is like, I should have been doing this a long time ago.
A long time ago, meaning right when you got out, during, what do you mean?
Whoa. Yeah, I'm glad you actually asked that. So, definitely, even if I had the idea when I first got out to do something like this, I would have not been ready. And I would have hoped that someone with some sense would have talked to me and said, no.
Not yet.
No, you are still immersed mentally in that prison culture.
Okay, and this is something I really wanted to talk to you about.
Okay.
Mindset.
Yes.
How did you get your mind right? Because to me, it seems once it clicked in here, you were then able to say, okay, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm doing. How did you get yourself ready mentally?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be really transparent here. Okay. So I screwed up a lot when I first got out. Okay. Wrecked relationships, entered into relationships where I thought I was ready, but emotionally I wasn't anywhere ready. But there was something about me that would draw people, right? But because my mind was not right,
yes,
I just would conduct myself. I mean, I've always conducted, I guess, outwardly, like just like I'm conducting myself now.
Yeah.
Right. So, but in terms of my intent, right, I was still very angry. I was still bitter. So the people who would show me affection or love, I would use it. I wouldn't respect it because I had lived in a place that taught me that it was anathema to respect affection. And affection is something that you use as a platform to catapult you to wherever you want to go.
Wow.
Right? And so to your question, how it happened for me, it happens differently for everybody, I guess, but how it happened for me is that just like you get desensitized to that abnormal environment and you just grow these calluses, once you get out and you train wreck enough, eventually each train wreck kind of knocks off that callus a little bit. And you kind of look back at yourself and you kind of, one day you wake up and you go, you know what? I'm not physically in prison anymore.
Right.
And then you go, what am I why did I do her like that?
Right.
And you just have these series of oh my God moments where it's another layer of shame. And then you're trying to figure out, okay, this is horrible what I'm doing. The trick is hopefully you have someone in your life that can say to you, look at how you lived for a decade. Like, look at how you lived. I'm not saying, Lawrence, what you did was right at all. I'm not giving you a pass on that. But you got to give yourself room to mature in the real world, which goes to your point about the age that individuals develop. So when I went in, I was 22. When I got out, chronologically, I was 32. But I was still conducting myself like I was 22. Yep. I was trying to make up those years from 22 to 32. And what do you do when you're 22? You want to go to the club. You want to hang out. You want to mess with, if you're a guy, you want to mess with as many girls as you can.
Yep.
And it's sport. Put all of that into the mindset of someone who lived like a savage for 10 years. So you train wreck. And then after the train wrecks, after you see the disappointment and the tears from people that you have hurt who believed in you, you just find a dark room and you're just like, I can't do this anymore. It's not their fault that I went to prison. and I shouldn't treat them like there's some girl mailing me a letter so I can get them to put money on my books. It's the mentality that you have. And so I would say all that. So I got out in 2002. For me, probably around 2006, 2007. It still wasn't all the way 100 smooth sailing, but I would say around 2011 is when I really was like the Lawrence that everybody knows now. Does that make sense? But when I got out, no.
I don't know what the percentages are, Lawrence. You'd be able to speak on this more than me. The percentages of men that do get out only to find themselves locked right back in
Yeah.
within a
Yeah.
year, within two
Yeah.
years. And
Yes.
hearing this, like, it's clear why. Yes, you're out physically, right?
Mhm.
But like you said, your emotional growth has been stunted. You're living like a savage. And
Yeah.
suddenly you find yourself free. How do you, that transition, there's no transition. There's no period to adjust, right? You're just thrown out into the real world, expected to be quote unquote normal. But how?
Yes. Yes. You know, one of the biggest wake up calls that I got, that came to me when I got out was through McDonald's. When I went in, a quarter pound of cheese was roughly in 1992 was roughly 89 cents. When I got out, it was $2 and something for a number 3 meal, quarter pound of cheese. And I remember when I went through the drive-through and they told me what the price was. I was like, that's not my order. Like I literally was like, and then it dawned on me how much time has passed.
Wow.
Right? And so the percentages, the recidivism numbers, and they usually measure within the first 3 years, right? Hover somewhere around 65%. That if a person doesn't make it through their first 3 years, 65% of them, or 65% of released inmates don't make it past their first 3 years. They go back. And there's so much, because when you're in prison, right? Like it's a weird stripping away when you first go, because you're used to making all these decisions for yourself. But when you go to prison, they tell you where you're going to sleep. They tell you when you're going to eat, how much you can eat, what time you can eat, when you're going to go outside, who you can talk to when you go outside, when you get on the phone. They determine who's going to call you. They determine who's going to see you, when you can see them, how often you can see them. They control what you can buy at the little commissary. You lose the ability to make so many decisions. You know, the average person, even without realizing, makes thousands of decisions a day. When you're an inmate, you probably make 200 of your own decisions a day, right? And those are just like, okay, I'm going to walk this way now.
Right. Right.
Like, and so getting out, you go through this crisis where all this responsibility
Right.
is crashing against, number one, I feel like I've been in a time capsule. Like the internet didn't even exist when I went to jail. I got out, there was the internet. So I had to come in the space of almost immediately, I had to step into the digital age. You know, you go to places for help and they're like, okay, just go online. I don't even know what the hell online is.
Wow.
So it's to adjust, it's really a tough thing if you don't have the support. And that's one thing, alongside of, going in and talking to the inmates, the one thing that Lawrence Speaks wants to do is provide programs to help inmates transition when they're getting out, because that's much needed. What's the point in giving the rah-rah speech inside, and when they get out, they're just like someone in a boat without a paddle?
Yeah.
And so it's really tough. And I think that, so there's a lot of people that may listen that are sympathetic to this or empathetic, but there's a lot of people that are listening. They're like, well, you shouldn't have went to jail. And that's true. But here's what I will say to anyone who thinks like that. People are getting out. They're coming home. Who do you want living in your neighborhood? Someone who is committed to positive change, or someone who is hell-bent on doing worse than what they did than they went in? That's why this cause is important to everybody.
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 Everyone. There's 2 million people locked up in America. Over 2 million people in our prison system right now. That's just 2 million individual cases. How many people are those families? How many connected families are to those 2 million people? We're talking about tens of millions of people that are affected by this.
I would like to just take a moment, Lawrence, to acknowledge you for the work that you are doing, acknowledge you for being such a beneficial presence on this planet, acknowledge you for going through what you went through to then come out on the other side and want to help people, want to educate people, want to show people the way. Thank you.
I don't even know what to say to that, Angie. Like, to be honest with you, like, I feel like, it's a full circle moment for me. And I feel like not, this isn't for me, because what I did it to myself.
Right.
But for society at large, we've got to take care of our society,
Yes.
right?
All right. So what I'm going to do is ask you a final question.
Sure.
And so, Lawrence, this is a question just for some sort of philosophical fun, but I'd love to hear your answer. Do you, Lawrence A. Haskins, feel that you were put on this planet at this particular time for a specific reason, or is it just random?
No, I definitely feel like it was for a specific reason. I do. And I know, when you say things like that, it almost sounds like you kind of have a God complex, but it's not that. It's just that when things happen a certain way, you know that you are joining yourself to something that's bigger than yourself.
Yes.
Like you're jumping in a current that it was just waiting for you to join in, but the current's already preformed. And so when I look at everything, my natural abilities, things that I inherited from my dad, right? And you put that with the ugliness that I went through. I just feel like the combination is something that is meant for glory. If you step outside and look at it, like, man, okay, this happened, but look, wow. And I feel like I have to live up to what was given to me to make this world better. And as corny and cliche as that sounds, but really at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Like, why are we here if it's not to uplift those that are around us? So at whatever cost, right? So yes, I and if anything this past 2 weeks have taught me is that what's meant to be can't be stopped.
Right.
Even if we try to stop it, even if we try to run from it, and what's meant to be, people will find you and just glare at you and just say, not glare in a bad way, but this light will come from them. Yes, Lawrence, this is what you need to be doing. Blah, 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 blah. And you're just like, okay, all right, fine. So, yes.
Is there, and I have to ask because, again, I'm just so in awe about your mind and how you were able to get your mind right. Is there a book that really made an impact on you just as a person? Is there a book that you would recommend?
God, what was that book that was circulated? It circulated inside prison a lot.
Ooh.
And it was a book, ironically, by Iceberg Slim.
Iceberg Slim, who is that?
Yeah, Iceberg Slim is a He's an urban author. He was, I would say. His most of his best work came out in the 70s. And he
Ooh.
wrote fiction, and it was always about the pimp lifestyle.
Ooh. I've never
How,
heard of this man.
yeah. However,
Wow.
he framed his stories in a way
Yeah?
that when you read them, it kind of fed this whole negativity that you had going on with you. Like, one day I'm gonna be a pimp and blah blah blah, right?
Okay.
But there was always this tragedy in these stories where, even though he was talking about that lifestyle and he was actually in real life a part of that lifestyle, he was not recommending it for anyone, because he wrote about the ugliness of it, and he always talked about the black experience, right, and social injustice and police brutality. He always intermingled that into his works. So, yeah.
Iceberg Slim, I have learned something today, many things today actually, but this is an author. I'm looking at the page right now that I will definitely look up. One last thing that you spoke on, and I guess, maybe Iceberg Slim, it sounds like he was in alignment with your philosophy on this. You and I spoke a little bit before about the glorification, especially in the hip hop culture, of
Yes.
going to of doing time. Speak a
Yes.
bit on that before we head out today, Lawrence.
Yes. So I want to be very clear about this. I know that in certain circles, going to prison is seen as a rite of passage, a badge of honor. It's seen as something that gives you cred. Let me make this emphatically clear. There is no worse disservice that a person can do to themselves than to do anything that will cause them to go serve time in prison. Prison is the most inhumane, ugly, nightmarish place. Evil, angry, isolated, lonely, miserable, violent place that exists on the planet Earth. And I'm all for artistic expression. I'm all for the Second Amendment. And I get it. I just remember when I got out and I would hear anybody rap, when I first got out, and I would hear anybody rap about, I did 10 in the pen and blah, blah. I would just turn the radio off, because I would be like, this is obviously someone who never did 10 years in prison. There is no way that you are going to feel great about doing 10 years in prison if you actually do 10 years. And I'm talking about 10 years straight. So let it be known, my sentence was 10 years straight. I didn't do 2 here, 3 here, a year here. No, I was in prison a decade straight, day in and day out. Missed holidays with my family. Watched my family members grow up. Some family members died when I was in prison. I never saw them again until I got out and I went and visited their grave. Your mind deteriorates in a way. You forget basic social graces when you're in prison. You're around a bunch of people, a bunch of individuals who are at their rawest in jail, and you have to survive through that. So anyone who's listening to this, don't buy into this myth, what you see in Hollywood, what you hear in rap songs or any other song about prison being a place you want to go to get your criminal bones. I can tell you right now, you will want to kill yourself. You will have to fight. When I went to prison, I was 22. I looked like I was 16. So the first 5 years of my prison sentence, I spent a lot of it in the hole because I was fighting. And I'm my daddy's son. I'm not a punk. You understand what I'm saying? So it was like, hey, look, this is what we're going to do. Stuff gets documented. And then what's tragic is they document all these incident reports. You get out years later, and then the probation officer uses that against you. Like, oh, you had a lot of violence. Well, Mr. Johnson, excuse me, but you didn't live in prison. These are things I had to do. I'm not Charles Manson. It was like I was just going around stabbing people. These are things I had to do
to survive.
So I could stand here to talk to you. And people may act like that's the kind of lifestyle that they want, but trust me, you don't want that. No one wants that. So whatever you're going through, my very worst day out here in the real world is 100 million times better than my best day in prison.
Of course.
So there's nothing that's worth making that decision, because when you're out here, you have options. You can get up, you can move around, you can talk to people, you always have a shot. But when they put those cuffs on you and throw you in that box, you're separated from everything. So don't let anyone fool you about prison is somewhere you want to go to learn this and do that and get your credibility up. Man, it's the dumbest thing you could do to yourself. Dumb. It's the greatest disservice anyone could do to themselves. And that's something I'm very passionate about. Again, don't want to step on the Second Amendment or anything like that, but make up your own mind is what I'm saying. Like, let entertainment be entertainment.
Right.
Let's not internalize this entertainment as fact.
Right.
And as take it as this is a path I want to take. It's entertainment. Leave it there and just know that you don't want to go to prison.
Oh my gosh. For people that want to know more about Lawrence Speaks, more about your works, your books, I know they can go to lawrancespeaks.com. Anywhere else I can tell this audience to visit your podcast?
Yeah. So my podcast is called Empire of the Infinite. You can search that on iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher. My site that I have for my books and also for my podcast is alawrencehaskins.com. So if you go to alawrencehaskins.com, you can learn more about my books. You can also search A. Lawrence Haskins on Amazon and find out more about me. So yeah.
All right.
I'm on social media everywhere at alh.the.author.
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And then also there's lawrencespeaks.com, right?
Yes. Yeah. And lawrencespeaks.com. Go there. You can find out more about what we're doing, our programs. And Lawrence Speaks, you can follow it on social media at LAWRENCESPKS. It was the only one that was available. The EA, I couldn't put the EA in. But Lawrence SPKS, and that's where you can find us on social media. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'll be sure to include all these links on the podcast page so people can just click onto that. And then for those listening, it'll also be on the ticker on the YouTube video when you watch. Thank you so much, Lawrence. This has been just so inspiring, and again, you're just such a beneficial presence on this planet, and we need more people like you. Thank you for sharing your story, for sharing your light. Keep shining, keep doing what you're doing. And Indie Film Tribe, thank you so much for hanging out with Lawrence and I today. Until next time.
Thanks for having me, Angela.
Of course. Bye.